Shalom and good day all, this is Tehillim29, back again for a comic review. As you can see here, we've got 4 comics in front, and I'll be reviewing them from the back to the front. So I'll be starting off with Batman, then moving on to Superman, then Detective, then I'll be moving on to Action Comics, and then finishing off again with Batman. So, let's get started. Firstly, I want to start off with this amazing variant cover, which is done by Jorge Jimenez, if I remember correctly. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it a 7 out of 10. Now, I'll move on to the main cover. So after that, I can finally begin to cover the internal art and the story. Now, as we begin to look at the main cover, does this main cover help depict of what is going to happen within, say, the first story in this? And yes, it does. I'm really happy with what Tinian has done here, especially with the first cover. And it also deserves the rating of 7 out of 10. Now it's time to move into the art for the first story, as this has 2 stories in it, the background one being Robin. Now this is some art at the beginning of the story. Absolutely incredibly done. I want to say one thing. The way Scarecrow is here, he looks like he's a villain Ronin, to be honest. And it does look like it has a little bit of manga influence to it, but it looks really interesting. And how it will play a part within the storyline. Considering one of the villains in this is also Manakano. So let's move to some art around the middle of the story. This is some of the art around the middle of the story, and I must admit, it really suits the story and also what's happening within the story plot. Of course, we see Simon Saint here proposing the magistrate program to finally go up against masked villains, or should I say vigilantes. And finally, up towards the end, to which we catch up with Bruce, who's finished on his night out being Batman, and he's catching up with some sparring with Ghostmaker. For this, I found the art was reasonably good, and I gave it a 7 out of 10. Now, as we move on to the story, did we get to see time within the story? No, we didn't, and in that it sort of lost the point. But one of the locations, in fact, we've got quite a number of locations here in regards to this, and I really liked the depth that was shown in pointing out these locations within Gotham. We had Robinson Park, we had Midtown, we had Fort Grey, and also the Mayor's Mansion. The cast consisting of Batman, Scarecrow, Oracle, yes, Oracle makes an appearance, Ghostmaker and Harley Quinn, of course Manakano, and Simon Saint. Were there any comic references in this? No, there weren't, but they probably wouldn't have hurt, even if it meant making a comic reference to the last issue or the last couple of issues, as it would have helped make this story develop more in character. To which I gave the story a 6.5 out of 10. Now to the backup story, and I really enjoyed this. This is some of the art around the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and towards the end of the story. I really enjoyed the art here, and I also like the artist's choice, uh, to which I gave the art a 7 out of 10, and not only that, it's really awesome to see one of my favorite Super Sons back. Okay, now to the story. Okay, for the story rating, what are some of the things that take place in this? Of course, we've got Damien and Talia, including the League of Lazarus in this, and that was really good that they were introduced into the story because it is based around Damien. Then we've got the location of Markovia. There was no time mentioned, but I'm not too worried about that because this is the introduction to the beginning of a new run. And the same in relation to comic references, even though a comic reference wouldn't have gone astray in relation to, say, Detective Comics by Tomasi, to when Damien made his last appearance. But overall, I gave the story, or this first part of the story, a 7 out of 10. It was nice to see Damien catch up with his mother in this run, but also see a little bit of squabbling between them as well. But Damien's journey ain't complete yet. There's still more to cover in regards to this story, and this is why I'll be returning to Detective Comics as the last thing to be reviewed in this Detective Comics Batman. Now it's time to move on to Superman issue 29. Now, as you can see here, I have the Superman regular as well as the variant. I will not be reviewing the backstories in this, and the same with the Action Comics. I won't be reviewing the backstory, which covers the Tales of Metropolis. But starting off with the first cover, does the first cover indicate something that will happen within the story? Well, if anything, it sort of indicates a fear in relation to John. Not necessarily something that happens within the story, to which I gave it a 6 out of 10. Now, as you can see next to that, I've got the variant, which I'll show it in full. I must admit, this is really incredible. I like the look of it. Okay, sure, about the only thing that I do dislike about it is that we don't have the young John Kent. Because I'm a Super Sons reader, like many Super Sons readers who want our DH John Kent back. But overall, I do enjoy the look of it, and I gave it an 8 out of 10. So, time to move into the internal art of the story. So, starting off with some of the art around the beginning, which is really nice. About the only thing I do want to point out, though, in regards to the art, and you not only see it in this, but you also see it in the Action Comics as well, is that in regards to the appearance of John, and of course Superman, in some places John looks more like a friggin' 30-year-old than he's meant to look like in regards to, say, in his teen years. And that really doesn't help the story that much. Just in regards to art, not so much the overall story, but it does play a part in the art, which does need fixing. So definitely get into that, Philip K. Johnson, because we do want consistency here, not inconsistency. I'll now move to the middle. Absolutely incredible scene here. After Superman having a bit of a fight with one of the new villains entering the fray. And of course, we see John a bit curious, but also caring towards his old man. And I really enjoyed this in the story. I'll now move to some art towards the end. And this is the art towards the end. To which I gave the art in rating a 7 out of 10. Now to move on to the story rating. I'm sorry to say this, but Philip K. Johnson, you didn't get a really high mark in this one and in the next one. I wish it had been better, but it also comes down to what you put into the story, to which you've scored the mark that you scored. In locations, about the only locations that we sort of get pointed out is Star Labs. With the cast of characters, of course, we've got Superman, Superboy, Clark Kent, and also John Samuel Kent. We've got Amanda Waller. Then we've got Lois and also Calix that also makes an appearance. It would have been nicer if it had more in regards to, say, locations being pointed out. Like, even if we just did it as, say, in the space above Earth, that would have made so much more sense, and it would also indicate the threat level as to what Superman and Superboy are up against. Were there any comic references? None. Did we get any indication of time? None of that at all. To which we do get to see this story in a bit of a narration, seen through John Samuel Kent's eyes in regards to sort of like him looking onto his old man and starting to realize that he's got vulnerabilities. He's not as strong or as invincible as I think it is. And this also carries over into the next issue. So it's time to move on to the next issue. Action Comics 1029. So as I jump onto Action Comics 1029, does the cover art help reflect what is happening in the story? It is, but it's still in part much like the cover art for Superman issue 29. I gave this cover art a 6 out of 10. So, time to move into the internal art. This is some art at the beginning of the story. As you can see, these characters do come over from the first issue that we see before. And it's really nice how they've sort of been done descriptively in appearance. And I really enjoyed that. I'll now move to something towards the middle. Of course, you can see the art once again. But as I pointed out earlier, before, still in some of these panels, John looks a little bit too old in appearance when he should actually look a little bit younger. And that criticism remains the same. But does it help bring across the story? If it was corrected, yes. But in regards to this, not so much. But it does help cover, in essence, the danger of what's happening within the story. And now we move towards the end. I must admit, I really did enjoy this bit at the end of the story. As you can see, it's also Clark Kent plus whoever else catching up with Pa Kent, but also having a bit of a heartful discussion which really helped make the story. So overall art for this, I'm being a little bit generous here, so a 7.5 out of 10. So let's move on to the story. Again, the same issues were seen again in regards to the last issue, to which we didn't get time or comic references. And it wouldn't hurt to have them put in the story. In fact, it would help gradually increase the character of the story and also bring up the continuity of the story. The locations we get to see are Earth and of course Warworld, and plus wherever the fuck we were in space. For all I know, it could have been outside of planet Pluto. It just wasn't pointed, and it should have been pointed. With the cast of characters, we do see Superman and Superboy, of course Mongol, and the one I didn't point out was actually Park Kent. And that was fairly alright. Before I gave the story a 6 out of 10, this time it's getting a 5.5 out of 10. Now it's time to move on to the last comic, being Detective Comics. So finally moving on to Mariko Tamaki's story in Detective Comics. Does this cover help indicate what is actually happening within the story? Surprisingly, it does a close enough effect, to which I gave the cover a 6.5 out of 10. Now it's time to move into the internal art at the beginning. Already an incredible start with the beginning of this story, including in the art. As you can see there, we've got a location. Now, locations are important in a story because if you don't know where things are being done or where it's being held, how are we to know where our characters are? So, time to move to mid-story. This is something that happens mid-story. As you can see, there's a bit of action happening here, care of Batman, Bruce Wayne. Really enjoyed that. So let's move towards the end. And this is some of the art towards the end. So time to move to the rating. What rating did I give the art? I also gave it a 6.5 out of 10. Now moving and jumping to the story. Did we get locations? You bloody bet we did, and it really did help in the marking of the story. Even though I didn't enjoy Tamaki's storytelling in Future State that much, I do feel it did make a slight improvement, as it let us know where we were with the character. Some of the locations being the Batcaves, Fort Grey, and City Hall. The cast consisting of Nakano, the new villains calling themselves the Party Crashers, and of course Batman himself. In this, you do get to see that Bruce Wayne is invited to this party as a sort, and when he's there, or when you do see it sort of like at one of the parties, especially in the beginning, you noticed a caped character not very far by, and it's not very clear as to who it is. I've got a rough guess who it could be. Maybe Cassie, or not Cassie, Cassandra Cain as Batgirl, but I might be incorrect on that. And of course, that wasn't clearly pointed out. It wouldn't have hurt to sort of like put it in the story, but it would have helped the story too. So, of course, Mayor Nakano is having a bit of a party. Bruce Wayne's there. And of course, he ends up having another one. And in this time, the party crashes. Batman turns up and he comes in to kick some ass and even save Nakano. But whilst this is happening, Nakano ditches out. And you can certainly see that there's some activity happening behind the scenes. Some involving maybe Scarecrow, some involving a couple of other villains that are unseen in the background. To which I gave the story a 6.5 out of 10. So, time to make a start on Demon and Detective Part 2. Or Story 2. So, starting off with the art at the beginning. Really nice. I will now jump to middle. The art towards the middle. Really nice, and I'm really digging it, and it gets me hyped for the story, what is coming. And yes, bit of a spoiler review here. The end. Oh, and I'm looking forward to what's going to happen in this story. So moving on to the art rating, I gave it a 7 out of 10. For the story, it was a cast of characters that was made up of Talia, Damien, the League of Lazarus, and of course, Hawk. Towards the end. The location, we're still in Markovia in what's happening here. We do get a comic reference to the last issue of Batman, which is Batman 106. Fantastic job done by the editor there. And of course, the parts are known as to where Hawk is. I want to say one thing, I really enjoyed this story, and I really think that there's a good possibility that yes, that Joshua Williamson is going to capture the voice and go out of his way to do all of his homework to capture the voice of everyone in connection to Damian Wayne and who Damian Wayne will encounter in the story. To which I gave the story a 7 out of 10, and it really deserves it. So a big thank you to Joshua Williamson as I look forward to reviewing the Damian Wayne Robin one when it comes out in April. Well, until then, please don't forget to hit the like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let's keep it colourful. If you've now made it to the end of the video, have yourself an awesome day.